launched the IBR FBAK supplement and IBR FBAK protocol. That's a coordination of 4 years' work and a major milestone in the transition from LIBOR. FBAKs mitigate the systemic risk that would arise from the cessation of the key interbank offered rate IBOR, and as such, they will be absolutely critical in the months ahead. During today's event, we will look at what the FBAKs are and why they're important and how they work. From Jan 25, 2021, an adjusted version of the relevant risk-free rate will automatically apply if an IBOR ceases to exist, or in the case of LIBOR, is deemed by the UK FBAK to be no longer representative of its underlying market. Where FBAKs are not designed to be a primary means of transitioning from LIBOR and other IBORs, they do mean a critical safety net will be in place for those participants that still have exposure to IBORs when a cessation and non-representativeness announcement is made. So far, signs are very positive. During the 2-week ASCO period prior to the official launch on October 23, 257 entities across 14 jurisdictions adhere to the ISTA protocol on a binding but non-public basis. As of today, the number stood at more than 740, including most of the major banks and many buy-side firms. We're confident that all adherence will continue to increase as we approach Jan 25, and our panels today will give you all the information you need to understand the supplement, the protocol, and the FBAK rates themselves. Given the complexity of replacing LIBOR and other IBOR with alternative risk-free rates, collaboration between the public and private sectors has been critical. Working groups in key jurisdictions have been very effective in setting targets and timelines and tackling challenges. We have been working with the Asian Pacific regulators very closely on the FBAKs for a number of benchmarks covered in the ISTA IBOR protocol and supplement, which we will discuss in detail in the next few hours. Okay, without further ado, we will get started with our session 1 on ISTA FBAK supplement. I would like to introduce my co-speakers before we get started. Joining me today is Sonia Lim. Sonia is counsel and Linklater based in Singapore. We also have Zhang Ho joining us today. Zhang is the head of legal, financial markets, and Standard Chartered Bank. Both Sonia and Zhang are frequent speakers of ISTA conferences. So now I will hand over to Zhang to get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Jing. Hope everyone can hear me. But thanks for all of you dialed in today for the first part of what is deemed to be a very interesting topic on introduction to the IBR FBAK supplement. So I have the honor to start today, and my colleague Sonia and Jing will cover the rest of the session together with us. So first thing first, as video that you have watched earlier testified, it provides there are two things we want to cover on this point is the IBR FBAK. So in this presentation, what the market will understand is in particular what is the supplement, the detail around the publication of supplement, an explanation on the overview of the rate options amended by the supplement, and also an illustration on how the new fallbacks introduced by the supplement will work in practice. So a lot to cover, but we will walk you through in terms of what you will learn through this session. So moving on to the next slide, as parties will be aware what Jing mentioned, ISDA published the IBR supplement and an IBR protocol on the 23rd of October 2020. So the supplement that was published had a go-live date of on the 23rd of with a 3-month period for parties to sign up to the that will be taken effect the effective date is on the 25th January 2021. Couple of reasons for this sort of staggered timeline is one, to enable market participants to digest, to understand the impact of supplement, obviously the protocol, which will be covered later. And also because traditionally in the month of December, most banks have what we call a quote freeze. So as you know, this exercise is not just merely a repapering, right? It also involves system changes. Just to make sure that we recap the stage, this is important. The supplement covers all new derivative transactions that incorporate the 2006 ISDA definitions. And the effective date would be those transactions that are entered into on or after the date on which the supplement is deemed published and effective, which is the 25th of January 2021. This would obviously include triggers and fallbacks. So when parties enter to new transactions incorporated in 2006 definition, on or after the effective date of 25th of January, there's no additional steps that's required to include the new fallback. The 2006 definitions would have been amended to incorporate the ISDA relevant IBOR fallback. So moving on to the scope of the supplement. As parties will know, the supplement is intended to amend the rate options to new triggers and fallbacks. And this will cover in the event of a permanent cessation. And for LIBOR rate options, the non-representativeness of the relevant rate. So if you look at the supplement, it amends the following sections of the 2006 definition. A number of currencies that we talk about. In this case, we have GBP LIBOR BBA. We have Swiss CHF LIBOR BBA. And then we have US dollar LIBOR BBA, Euro LIBOR BBA, Japanese yen LIBOR, also in the Australian BBSW, and Hong Kong dollar HIBOR as well. And I think there are also two other additional currencies other than baht. So that would be Sing dollar SOR, as well as Thai baht FIC. So the supplement includes new fallback positions, as I mentioned. And when the supplement is published and becomes effective, the 2006 definition will include this new risk-free rate fallback. So I think key to note, scope, timing, and what events will trigger a fallback. So each relevant IBOR will be replaced by the relevant adjusted risk-free rate following the trigger event is following a permanent cessation of the relevant IBOR mentioned. If you look at the table, this provides a very neat segue into what I've just mentioned in terms of currencies pairs on the left, relevant IBOR rate options, the line rate for fallback rate. So before I move on to hand over to Sonia, just to recap, effective date for the supplement is on the 25th of January. And parties need to be aware of the relevant currency pairs that we mentioned, and ensure that for contracts, for new transactions that they enter into on or after the effective date, 2006 definitions would capture relevant rate options as amended by the government.
Yeah, thank you, John. So within the next 10 or 15 minutes, I will cover the spread adjustment methodology and discuss some of the provisions in the IBOR fallback supplement. There are some fundamental differences between IBORs and RFRs. RFRs are overnight rates, where IBORs are available in multiple tenors. So additionally, IBORs incorporate a bank credit liquidity risk premium and has different liquidity characteristics and fluctuations in supply and demand compared to RFRs. Due to the differences between IBORs and RFRs, certain adjustments to RFRs are needed to ensure that derivative contracts referencing IBORs will continue to function as closely as possible to the original agreement if fallbacks referencing the IFRs take effect. IFTA has conducted a field consultation and has established that market participants prefer to use the compounded setting arrears rate to address differences in tenor between IBORs and overnight IFRs, and a historic median over a 5-year look-back period approach to deal with differences in credit liquidity risk and other factors such as liquidity and fluctuations in supply and demand. The compounded setting arrears rate is the relevant IFRs observed over a period of time that is generally equivalent to the relevant IBOR tenor and compounded daily during that period. It will be calculated and published on a daily basis for each relevant IBOR tenor. To deal with the operational difficulty of making a payment based on a rate that is only known at the end of the period, the rate will be backward shifted for 2 business days. For example, 2 applicable reference rate business day is used. This means the last observation of the IFR for each calculation period would be 2 business days before the relevant payment date. The historic median approach to the spread adjustment is based on the median difference between the IBOR and adjusted IFR calculated over a static look-back period prior to the relevant announcement of publication triggering the fallback provision. It will be calculated and published for each relevant tenor based on historic differences between the IBOR for that tenor and the corresponding IFR compounded over a time period with the same length and the tenor. As a result, a historic spread may differ across different tenors for the same IBOR. Bloomberg, which is IFTA's fallback adjustment window, has started to publish the fallback rate on an indicative basis. So we will have somebody from Bloomberg talk about the fallback publication, so I won't go into detail during this session. There are a few sections in the IBOR fallback supplement which are fairly complicated, and those are related to linear interpolation. So I want to take a few minutes to give you an overview of those provisions. A new Section 8.5 on discontinued rate maturity and the Section 8.6 on certain definitions are added to the 2006 definitions pursuant to the supplement. One thing to note is that Section 8.5 and 8.6 are not applicable to TIBOR fixed and SOAR, but they are applicable to the rest of the IBORs covered under the supplement protocol. So what the Section 8.5 is trying to address is a scenario where only certain tenors of relevant IBOR will be permanently discontinued, or in respect of LIBOR become non-representative, where a shorter or longer tenors of the relevant IBOR continue to be available, and in respect of LIBOR not becoming non-representative. So Section 8.5 provides if the rate for reset date is to be determined by reference to a discontinued tenor, and at least 2 other tenors are available. So one is longer, one is shorter. Then the rate for the reset date will be determined by interpolating between the next shorter and next longer available IBOR tenors. If there is no such shorter or longer tenor, then the interpolation between IBOR tenors will not be possible. And in such a case, an index cessation effective date will be deemed to have occurred. So the relevant index cessation event will occur on the date of the announcement, pursuant to which all shorter or all longer tenors will be discontinued. All in respect of LIBOR become non-representative. The related index decision effective date will be the first date on which all shorter or all longer IBOR tenors are discontinued, all in respect of LIBOR when they become non-representative. There is also a new Section 7.9 fallback for key IBOR rate options for certain calculation periods to which linear interpolation is specified to be applicable. That section is added to 2006 is the definitions where the supplement. And a new Section 7.10 and 7.11 are also added for SOAR and TIBAR fixed, and I will explain later on why there are different provisions applicable to SOAR and TIBAR fixed as compared to the other IBORs. So what the original Section 8.3 of 2006 is the definition says is that parties that agree they would use a rate which is calculated by reference to two rates by using the linear interpolation. So again, this is commonly referred as a stop period. So if you have entered into a transaction with a tenor of 1 month or 20 days, that will be a non-standard tenor. And sometimes in the trade confirmation parties provide in such cases, you will interpolate, for example, 1 month and 3 month tenor to get the rate for the 1 month and 20 days tenor. So if that's specified in your original trade confirmation, the supplement, this new Section 7.9, will apply in certain circumstances. So this new Section 7.9 provides if a linear interpolation pursuant to Section 8.3, which we just covered, or the new discontinued rate, the new Section 7.9 provides if a linear interpolation pursuant to Section 8.3 of the 2006 is the definition, or the new discontinued rate maturity provision in Section 8.5 cannot be used to determine the rate for reset date, then the risk-free rate will be compounded over the length of the calculation period or compounding period, and the spread will be added. The spread will be calculated by interpolating between the Bloomberg published crystallized spread for the tenors, which are next shorter and next longer than the length of the calculation period. Or if there is either no longer no shorter crystallized spread, the crystallized spread for the tenor, which is closest in length to the calculation period, should apply. Okay, I know it all sounds very complicated, but on the ISTA website, you will be able to find FAQs for the ISTA IBOR supplement protocol. And in that document, there includes a flow chart regarding application of Section 7.9 and Section 8.5. So I would highly recommend you take a look, and that would give you a much better understanding of how the provisions operate. Okay. Now I want to take just a few minutes to discuss the specific provisions which are applicable to SOAR and TIBAR fixed. The reason why the supplements have different provisions applied to the two rates is because some specific features or the unique features of the two rates. The SOAR and TIBAR fixed rates are swap implied rates. In other words, they are calculated based on dollar LIBOR.
When LIBOR goes rate. So if you look at the 2000 6 definitions, I think the first thing to bear in mind is that there are two important but different concepts. So first, you have the concept of index cessation event, and then you also have the concept of index cessation effective date. Now, these are different, so let me just run through that. So an index cessation event happens when there is a public statement that IBOR will cease, has ceased, or will cease, or has become non-representative or will become non-representative. So if you look at what an index cessation event is, firstly, there has to be a public statement, right? But what is important is that an index cessation event can be a forward-looking event, in the sense that when there's a public statement that LIBOR will cease or will cease to be non-representative, that can be an index cessation event. So what could be announced today doesn't mean that LIBOR has ceased or has become non-representative. Now, compare that to what an index cessation effective date is. Now, an index cessation effective date only happens when LIBOR or IBOR has ceased or ceased to be representative. So if you compare the two concepts, practically speaking, you could have a different date, i.e. an index cessation event happening first and then followed on by an index cessation effective date. Now, you may ask the question, why is there a difference? So I think to put it simply, when there's an index cessation event, i.e. when there's a public announcement, technically nothing much happens, right? Because IBOR could still be there, except for the fact that the index cessation event, the occurrence of an index cessation event, is when the spread is actually fixed by Bloomberg. So that is one important concept, right? To understand that it is the announcement of an event that will actually trigger a crystallization of the spread at the Bloomberg level. Now, it is when an index cessation effective date, that's the trigger date where you then actually kick off the fallback rate. So meaning that the fallback rate only comes in when the index, the LIBOR has ceased permanently or has ceased to be non-representative. So those are two key concepts to bear in mind. And I think a few other interesting points here that I would mention. First of all, if you look at the concept of index cessation event and index cessation effective date, now this is only triggered when all tenors of LIBOR has discontinued or will discontinue, right? So this is a very important concept, right? Because if, let's say, there's an announcement that only a specific tenor will cease, this will not actually result in a fallback. But instead, what would happen within the framework of the 2006 definitions is that you would trigger what we call the DRM provisions, which Jing mentioned about, and you go through, a series of interpolation. So that's one concept. Second interesting thing to probably mention here is that, if you look at the two concepts here, what has happened over the number of consultations through the years is that pre-cessation trigger has now been built in, right, as a trigger event. Now, obviously, if you take, a step back, this has, resulted in a number of discussions amongst the industry, whether or not there should or should not be a pre-cessation trigger. But where I think the industry has landed on now is that pre-cessation trigger is something that will be and has been hardwired into the 2006 definitions. Now, if you look at the pre-cessation trigger in the 2006 definitions and the way it is drafted, and just moving ahead a little bit, you will see that it is actually a lot more prescriptive than the type of pre-cessation event that you see in cash products. So the ISTA 2006 definition, prescribes a pre-cessation event when there's an announcement that IBOR, the relevant LIBOR, will cease to be non-representative, and that's made with the knowledge that it will actually result in a contractual trigger. So there are some of these nuances in the way the definitions are drafted, and I think it's important to have a look at that because what you will hear in the later sessions today is I would say the inconsistency to some extent between derivatives and cash products, and pre-cessation trigger is something that will probably come up because the way it is drafted in the 2006 definitions is slightly different from the way it's being drafted or introduced, say, through the ARC language. Let's then look at index cessation event in the context of SAW and Thai baht fix. So like what Jing has mentioned, SAW and Thai baht fix is something that is addressed in the 2006 definitions. And the difference here is that US dollar LIBOR is being used to calculate SAW and Thai baht fix. So if you look throughout the 2006 definitions, you will see that some of the standard provisions it's actually very clear that it doesn't apply to SAW and Thai baht fix. For example, the DRM provisions, right? It is made clear that you carve that out. And the reason for that, like what Jing mentioned, is because US dollar LIBOR is used as a component. So question then is, how does that work? So in the case of these two currencies, you will see that index cessation event and index cessation effective date, that is tagged at the US dollar LIBOR. Right. So what this means is that it is the discontinuance of US dollar LIBOR or the non-representativeness of US dollar LIBOR that will trigger an index cessation event at the SAW and the Thai baht fix level. Right. So it is not a discontinuance of SAW or Thai baht fix, but it is a discontinuance of US dollar LIBOR that triggers an index cessation event at the SAW and the Thai baht fix level. So these are some of the important concepts to bear in mind. What I'll do next is take a few minutes to walk through some examples of how the contractual fallback provisions work for a number of these currencies. So first and foremost, let's take a look at US dollar LIBOR because presumably I think this is the one currency that people probably have in their books. So looking at the right-hand side of this slide, you will see that first, if there's an index cessation event and an index cessation effective date that has occurred, right? Meaning that LIBOR has ceased or has ceased to be non-representative. The first fallback that you'll go to is fallback rate SAW. And like what Jing has explained earlier, fallback rate SAW is a component comprising of term adjusted SOFR plus spread. So this is what people refer to as the all-in rate, right? It has two components, term adjusted SOFR plus spread. And this is what Bloomberg will be publishing. The good thing about the 2006 definitions is that as people kind of like go through this exercise, we're planning ahead, right? In the event that a fallback rate ceases to be there, right? And contingencies are being planned for that. So if you look at the definitions, there is really this waterfall. So it then discusses what happens if fallback rate SOFR, right, is permanently discontinued, and it could happen, right? So then what it says is that it falls back to SOFR plus spread, right? And then it goes on to say that if, let's say, SOFR for some reason is permanently discontinued, then again, there is a series of fallback rates that is now prescribed in the 2006 definitions. So you have the Fed recommended rate plus spread, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at say US dollar LIBOR here and GBP LIBOR, we've kind of put it side by side. And I think the point to note here is that depending on the currencies, right, the fallbacks or fallbacks could work differently. So what is important is, for relevant institutions to really run through it to make sure that, you understand how that works, and there could be nuances, amongst different currencies. So that's US dollar LIBOR. Now, why don't we then look at SGD SOR? It's very similar to Thai baht fix, but as we run through it, you'll see that it is actually quite different from US dollar LIBOR, right? Again, for the reason that in the case of SOR and Thai baht fix, what's the main difference is that US dollar is being used as a component to calculate SOR and Thai baht fix. So running through the waterfall on the left-hand side, right, you will see that if there's an index cessation event or index cessation effective date, in respect of US dollar LIBOR, not SOR, but in respect of US dollar LIBOR, this is when you then trigger the fallback rate SOR to apply. And this is a rate that is provided by ABS, right? So the difference here is that instead of Bloomberg, for the fallback rate SOR, this is something that is provided by ABS, and it is published by Refinitiv. Now, fallback rate SOR has gone through a number of industry consultations as well. And if you look at the way it's currently provided for in the supplement, fallback rate SOR, it uses adjusted SOFR as a component for its calculation. Right, there was a lot of discussion as to whether it should be SORA or not. But I think where the industry has landed is that it will be fallback rate SOR that comprises of adjusted SOFR. Now, similarly, like the way the waterfalls for US dollar LIBOR is provided, there are other provisions that takes into consideration what happens if fallback rate SOR is no longer available. So you have the MAS recommended rate. And if for some reason there's no MAS recommended rate, that's when you actually fall back to SORA. So again, just to reiterate, the way it works for different currencies can be different, is different. So spend some time to have a look to see how it actually works, for the currencies that you have sitting in your books. Now, I think with that, what I would like to do before we, close off this first session is to take a step back and, just refocus on what people need to do or need to consider. Seeing that, the 2006 supplements, it's already been finalized and, will be effective very soon. So for those of you who has had the chance to look at the 2006 supplement, you will see that it is, unfortunately, a fairly long document. It is more than 100 pages. There are key concepts that people talk about, but there are also some of the fairly complex ones which Jing has went through. So things like, the DRMs and also the interpolation. So, spend some time to have a look at it and see how it actually affects your portfolio transactions. And, there's very helpful FAQs that ISDA has actually published. Now, as a matter of practice and recap a few things, John has talked about the timing of the fallback supplement. So to recap, it will apply automatically to new trades, right, coming in from January, right? But obviously, there's a question of what happens to your legacy portfolio, and that's where the next session will touch on how the protocol actually works to help market participants to adopt or to incorporate the new fallback supplement into legacy transactions. Now, as the market is trying to understand the 2006 supplement, one thing that has come up very often is how does this actually differ from the benchmark supplement? So I think to put it very shortly, the benchmark supplement was put in place a few years back, and that was really to address the EU benchmark regulations. Now, what the benchmark supplement seeks to do is to provide a framework of what happens if there is a discontinuance of a certain rate. Now, whereas the fallback supplement actually identifies the rate. So it is different, but the way the benchmark supplement and the ISDA supplement 2006 supplement is drafted, it's meant to complement each other. So again, that's addressed in the FAQ, have a look at that. Now, the last 2 points I would highlight, and this is what the industry currently is struggling, thinking about, is how the ISDA supplement actually works in the context of hedge products as well as non-linear products. So I think that one thing to bear in mind is that while the 2006 definitions has been very helpful to hardwire some of these provisions into derivatives contract, what is still out there is how do people deal with hedge products. So going back to my earlier point, the way that the market conventions, the rates are calculated for derivatives, is different across derivatives, cash, and loans. So something for people to think about when they apply the 2006 definitions. Do you need to amend? Do you not need to amend? Does the loan lead it, or does the swap lead that? Now, similarly, I think in the case of non-linear products, when you apply the 2006 supplements to the non-linear products, there can be a change in risk profile. And the later panel, there's a panel session on this. So I think with that, I will stop and see if the other co-speakers have anything else to add, or if people have questions that they might want to raise to us at this point.
So I just want to add one thing I meant to cover regarding the Section 8.5 and the new Section 7.9 to 7.11 added for the regarding how the linear interpolation will be applicable. So Sonia has given a very good summary about why IBR FBAK and SOR are different. One of the differences is that both IBR FBAK and SOR is defined as a LIBOR rate option, so their fallback is triggered by permanent cessation of a US dollar LIBOR or non-representativeness of US dollar LIBOR, not actually by announcement triggered by MAS or Bank of Thailand, which is the central bank of the relevant currency. So that's a difference. And because the unique feature of IBR FBAK and SOR being swap implied rate calculated based on the FX swap and dollar LIBOR, some of the provisions apply to them differently. The thing point I'm trying to highlight here is that, as I mentioned previously, Section 8.5 on discontinued rate maturity has been disapplied for IBR FBAK and SOR. That decision was made after, a thorough discussion with both Bank of Thailand, MAS, and also their working group members regarding, how to work out when a certain tenor of their benchmark is discontinued. A refresh of what we discussed before is that for other IBORs, if you still have a longer tenor, shorter tenor, and you just keep doing linear interpolation to get the tenor for your rate of your transaction, and that linear interpolation work and the Section 8.5 is to be calculated by calculation agent. Okay, but in the case of IBR FBAK, the decision made was that rather than, let's say, if a SOR 6 months is discontinued, rather than interpolating the next shorter, next longer tenor of SOR, the decision is to interpolate the dollar LIBOR rate. Okay, because of that, therefore, Section 8.5 is not applicable to the two FX swap implied rates. So when they do the interpolation of dollar LIBOR for SOR and IBR FBAK, it's actually not a calculation agent of the trade. It's actually the respective administrator which is ABS for SOR and bicomparison for Thai baht fixed, will publish the interpolated rate. Again, this is the difference from other IBORs. And also, as I mentioned, regarding the non-standard period stop rate, there is a section 7.9 added for other IBORs and 7.10, 11 added for Thai baht fixed and SOR. So they are, in principle, the logic is very similar to other IBORs, but when it comes to the two Asian benchmark, the sequence is to interpolate the underlying dollar LIBOR rather than underlying directly interpolating the SOR or Thai baht fixed rate.
So I mean, the way that I would see it is that the benchmark supplement has been out there probably for 2 to 3 years now, right? And I think like we mentioned earlier, it was meant to address the EU benchmark regulation. So if you take a step back and see what the benchmark supplement does, number one, it actually seeks to introduce certain contractual triggers, right? But bear in mind that that doesn't extend to pre-cessation triggers. So that's one point. Second point as well is that if you look at the benchmark supplement, it cuts across different products. So you could have equities, you could have commodities and rates. But I think more fundamentally, if you look at the benchmark supplement, it provides a framework, right, where parties will then agree, okay, if let's say a contractual trigger happens, what is the so-called quote unquote fallback? So at that point, when the ISDA benchmark supplement was published, the industry has not identified what the fallback rate is, right? So what the 2006 supplement does now is that for the FROs that are in the 2006 supplements, it now basically says this is the fallback rate. So in a way, it's similar, but it seeks to achieve different things. Right, and the way the benchmark supplement and the 2006 supplements work is that, looking at the ISDA materials, there are provisions to say that, if you adhere to both, the 2006 fallbacks actually take priority. So, these are some of the, I think just the issues and, to think through and to consider, right, between, what the benchmark supplement seeks to do and what the 2006 definitions seek to do.
Yeah, just to add to what Sonia mentioned, there are two. They are not exactly the same thing. I want sort of to be aware the ISDA benchmark and the ISDA fallback are two mutually. They're covered different scope. I.e., in the sense that in the context of the IBOR fallback, it's primarily interest rates we're looking at in terms of interest rate impact. Whereas the ISDA benchmark, as Sonia mentioned, not just about the interest rate change from legacy benchmark that transitioned to risk-free rate. In terms of the ISDA benchmark, it's primarily driven from, it's widened there, but originally it was drafted with the European benchmark regulation in mind. When we talk about benchmark, it's not just interest rate. You got commodities, you got equities, you got indices that are where under the current European benchmark regulations need to be either authorized or approved for use in Europe. So I think the way to load it that if parties originally have signed up to the 2018 ISDA benchmark, it provides a framework, but it doesn't really address the specific amendment that the IBOR fallback is intended to achieve with respect of the affected rates that Jing and Sonia have just mentioned. So I think hopefully that put it in scope, because we are looking on commodity indices, you're going to FX indices, and you need to look at it because the benchmark addresses that as opposed to your ISDA IBOR fallback will only address the interest rate component. And it's very specific in terms of what amendments it does. So ISDA benchmark does have a hierarchy, as Sonia mentioned, that if you are signed in both, then in the context of the ISDA IBOR sort of impact, then the ISDA IBOR fallback takes.
So I think with that, we've answered all the questions. I will now hand over to our speakers to cover the ISDA IBOR protocol.